security teams report this.
Starfleet is one of the most powerful entities that exists in the Trek universe, at least during the 24th century. Its borders expand in nearly every direction, and no other major power has ever been able to defeat them. This in large part due to the technology of the United Federation of Planets, and the engineers who create and upkeep said technology. When the Federation converted its resources to a wartime economy, vessels of enormous power, including the Akura, Defiant, and Sovereign class, became the mainstay of the fleet. These behemoths, and many others like them, hold advanced technologies and tactical ability that can even contend with the Borg. But the question today isn't about the might of the Federation's naval division, but more about the lackluster ground forces that they filled. To be plain, Starfleet security is pitiful and is one of the worst contingents in the Alpha and Beta quadrants, if not the universe. But the question is, why? At first, one might be tempted to theorize it is due to a lack of ground-based technology, but Starfleet is equipped to handle land-based battles. We know this is true as Starfleet has personal force fields, phaser rifles, photon grenades, tricorders, and more. So what about their training? Well, according to Tasha Yar, Starfleet security is some of the best in the Alpha and Beta quadrants. It's assumed that this is due to tactics learned from the United Earth's MACOs, as well as the holodecks. Training really isn't a problem in the 24th century. Though, if we're honest, it does appear that when Starfleet sends their security personnel to installations and to vessels, they aren't sending their best. However, ironically, none of this is actually the reason that ground forces are not prevalent. It's something far, far more simple.
Fire.
The fact is, Starfleet doesn't value ground combat. It doesn't value putting boots on land. And the reason that it doesn't find this necessary is the same reason that the United States military doesn't find it necessary to train their Marines on the flintlock pistol. It's not something that Starfleet sees as a worthwhile endeavor. They're not going to need it much. While scarcity isn't a problem for the Federation, they do have to worry about time. You can only train your recruits for so long before you stop getting a return on investment, and so the need for ground combat is considered obsolete. And the argument for this isn't exactly erroneous. Starfleet vessels are insanely powerful and can do almost anything you need them to do. They have the ability to pacify entire groups of people on a planet, or they could simply destroy the planet itself. The advent of the transporter means that any ne'er-do-well elements you wish to isolate can be isolated. There are even entire weapons that can make a planetary body uninhabitable for one species while allowing it to be inhabitable for others. Large-scale combat is just not something that is considered viable. Entire armies can be quelled with the push of a button. In fact, the only real possibility of combat, at least that Starfleet Tactical surmises, is small-scale skirmishes that generally occur on the home field. This would be on a Starfleet installation or Starfleet ship, as I've mentioned. And because of this, the use of teleporters, force fields, and more could be widely utilized. This means that a need for small-scale combat in groups of 3 to 5 is necessary, but you don't have to put a lot of effort into it. And because of that, they don't really train well, at least from what we observe. And honestly, this mentality likely came from the Federation's golden era, where they only fought species that were generally less powerful than they were. The Cardassians being a prime example, though even in that instance there was some ground combat and no one learned their lesson. The Federation, and Starfleet, would see utilizing Marines and holding a planet as obsolete when you have such powerful ships. The problem is, Starfleet's wrong. And we look no further than that of the Borg, the Klingons, and the Dominion. These three powers not only have parity with Starfleet vessels, but are either trained in close-quarter combat or have such a technological advantage that hand-to-hand combat is useless without more training. I would even make the argument that while armor would not save against weapons that can disintegrate you, it does make sense to still have them and perhaps maybe modify the uniform so that they're tougher so that you can resist against or defend against fire, shrapnel, debris, and other dangers. But they don't even do that. Full-scale ground combat is rare, but it does happen. We see this with the Borg, the Near-Federation Civil War, Siege of AR-558, and the Klingon attack on a hospital. It's something that should be trained for, especially when it looks like you're about to fight someone on the horizon. If I were head of Starfleet Tactical, I would probably create a division like that of the Makos and keep it somewhat small. You would definitely have Marines on board, but they may not match how many security personnel you have. But they would have the knowledge on how to fight in all scenarios, including urban, large-scale, and more, just in case the command staff needed that expertise. As stated, the argument for why ground forces like that of the Mako don't exist is compelling. They do make a good argument, but ultimately, I feel it's lackluster. Starfleet security should revamp how it handles operations, and hopefully, after the Dominion War, they did. But these are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.